Hello everybody, this is notes number 1 with Miss S. Today is the first of the notes, and most likely you will not be watching this until the end of the year for review. So today we're going to be learning about the 6 most common elements. Specifically, carbon is the most important, and we're going to learn about why, and the 4 organic molecules that all have carbon inside of them. They all have different functions and structures, so let's start. Before we begin, we just need to talk about what chemistry is. Obviously, this course is biology, but chemistry and biology are linked. Chemistry is the scientific study of the structure, properties, and reactions of the chemical elements and the compounds they form. So we're going to be looking at the structure of molecules, what it looks like. We're going to be looking at the properties of molecules, what it can do, or what does it have, and the reactions, which are what can it bind with. So for example, you might think of water, H2O, has hydrogen and oxygen, and they can bond together to form a water molecule. And we're going to be looking at elements. Elements, I want you to think of the periodic table of elements. This is what you commonly see on the wall of chemistry teachers' rooms. These are all the elements, but we're not going to be focusing on all these complicated things because we're just going to be worrying about the elements that make up life, since we're learning about biology, the study of life. So, if this is an element, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, a compound is when 2 or more elements are together. So, for example, water. Water has the elements hydrogen, 2 of them, and 1 oxygen. Hydrogen is an element, oxygen is an element. When they bond together, they form a compound. An easy way to remember what a compound is co means together. Think about a co-worker that you work with. You work with them together. You and, say, Freddie work together. So hydrogen and oxygen work together to form a water molecule or a water compound. But we're going to be focusing on mostly elements right now. We're going to be talking about the 6 essential elements that are necessary for life. And they are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. An easy way to remember these 6 are CHNOPS, the way it sounds, CHNOPS, or I like to do it as NHCOPS, New Hampshire COPS. Now the MCAS love to ask questions on the 6 essential elements. So whenever there's a multiple choice about elements, don't pick one that we've never talked about, like magnesium or chlorine. No. Whenever they're going to be asking you about elements, you're going to pick either carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, or sulfur. These are all found in living things and necessary for something to be living. Now the most important one you can see I start here is carbon. Carbon is really important because it forms organic molecules. Now you probably think of organic as going into the grocery store and it's the more expensive fruit because it doesn't have preservatives or pesticides on it. But no. In biology, whenever you hear the word organic, it means that it has carbon. If it does not have carbon, then it's considered inorganic, the opposite. So living organisms are composed of organic and inorganic molecules, but we're going to be focusing on organic molecules because carbon can form organic molecules. And these organic molecules are sometimes called macromolecules. Think about what the word macro means. If we're talking about a microscope, we're looking at something that's really, really small. Macro is the opposite. It means we're looking at something really, really large. So macromolecules are large molecules that are formed from carbon. There are also other elements, and we're going to look at those. But carbon is the reason why we can form these big molecules. So here's the reason why. Carbon can form 4 arms or bonds with other molecules. That means if I have a carbon right here, it can link up with another carbon and 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 form this long chain of carbons. And form this big chain of carbons, this big molecule, a macromolecule. Now there are 4 macromolecules that we're going to be learning about. So these big molecules are known as polymers. Poly means many. So macromolecules are polymers, large molecules, that are formed from monomers. The word mono means one. Okay? So if I have one tiny little Lego, right, that's not building anything. But if I stack a Lego on a Lego on a Lego and I build this whole thing, I can build a car, I can build a house. So one Lego is a building block. It's just one monomer. And if I put a lot of Legos together, then I have a polymer. I have many of them together. So our 4 macromolecules that we're going to be learning are carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids. Lipids are the exception in that they don't have a true building block. But some of these words should seem familiar, such as carbohydrates. You probably think of carbs, especially if you're a girl, you don't want to eat too many carbs, otherwise you gain a lot of weight. So carbohydrates are your breads, your pastas, your candy, they're sugars. Your proteins, boys, you probably think of proteins when you go to the gym, when you need to build muscle. What do you usually drink before or after a workout? A protein shake. We're building muscle here. And nucleic acids, well, we're going to learn all about what that is in a second. So the first one that we're going to focus on are carbohydrates. Again, carbs are your breads and your pastas, but I want you to think sugar. Bread and pasta and candy are all made up of sugar. Carbohydrates are sugars. And think about what sugar does for you. If you eat candy, all of a sudden you get hyper. You're getting quick energy. You might feel hyper for a little while, but then it soon fades away because carbohydrates serve as quick energy or short-term energy. There are also carbohydrates that play a role in building the cell walls of plants, bacteria, and insects, but we're not going to focus on that. Now the monomers, or the building blocks of carbohydrates, are called monosaccharides. One saccharide. Saccharide means sugar. So one sugar is a monomer. If I have a monosaccharide, one sugar, and I add another sugar, and I add another sugar, and I add another sugar, then I'm going to get a carbohydrate. I'm going to get a big molecule. Some of the common monomers or monosaccharides are glucose, fructose, and galactose. Notice what all of these end in. They all end in ose. Let me get my pointer here so this I can write all over. Glucose, fructose, galactose. So whenever you see this ending OSE, it means it's a sugar. This is what glucose looks like. You can draw it in a long chain form, or you can draw it in this ring structure. So just one ring is a monosaccharide. Now this formula right here that this arrow is pointing to is pointing to the chemical formula for glucose, which is the sugar that we're going to focus on because this is the sugar that your body uses to make energy. And the formula is C6H12O6. Sugars always have the same number of carbons as oxygens and twice the number of hydrogens. So 6 times 2 is 12. That's why we have 12 hydrogens here. So if mono means one, di means two. So if we take 2 monosaccharides, such as glucose and glucose, and link them together so that they're combined, we're going to get a disaccharide. Di means 2. So for example, glucose and fructose is going to create sucrose. Glucose and galactose, again, these are sugars, so they all end in OSE, is going to make lactose. Lactose is what is the sugar that's found in milk. So if you hear someone's lactose intolerant, it means they can't have milk. It's not the actual milk that they can't digest, it's the sugar in the milk that makes them sick. Now, if I link many monosaccharides together, I'm going to get a polysaccharide. So I'm not just linking two together. Look how many monosaccharides I have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So starch is an example of a polysaccharide, such as what's found in pasta. So that's why marathon runners often eat pasta before a race, because it gives them energy. Glycogen is another example, but we're not going to focus too much on that. It is stored in your liver. Cellulose is the example of a sugar that is found in the cell wall of plants. So here we have an animal cell and we have a plant cell. Plants have this extra wall. They have this cell wall that makes them not collapse. They need that extra support. So there's a sugar found in the cell wall called cellulose. So cell wall, and you know it's a sugar because it ends in ose. We can't digest cellulose in our diet. It's referred to as fiber. Lipids is our next macromolecule. So we learned all about carbohydrates, all about sugars a second ago. Now lipids are fat. Think liposuction or love handles made up of fats. So lipids are serving as long-term energy, but they also do many other things. Now lipids do not dissolve in water. Think about mixing oil and water together. You're going to get that layer of separation. You're going to have the water and you're going to have the oil. Now fats don't have a true monomer and polymer. We're going to look at that in a second. Fats are made up of triglycerides. Tri means 3. Think of a tricycle. So fats have 3 fatty acids, 1, 2, 3, and they're made up of a glycerol. So it's tri for these 3 and glyceride for the glycerol molecule here. So they don't have a true monomer and polymer. They are just made up of these things. Now, the most common type of lipids, and the one that I want you to think of when you think of lipids, are fats. So those are storing energy and serving as insulation in our body. Oils are also types of lipids. They're a different type of fat. They're an unsaturated fat. It also stores energy. There's also a type of lipids that's found on the surface of leaves. If you ever feel a leaf, it's kind of waxy. That wax is a lipid. And what that does is it keeps the water inside of the plant, so that it's not easily sucked up and the plant becomes dry. Steroids are another type of lipids. These are chemical messengers in our body. So testosterone, for example, is a male steroid that sends signals to start puberty. Phospholipids are another type of lipid that form our cell membranes, forms the outside layer of our cells. Proteins are our next type. Proteins, I want you to think about protein shakes for building muscle. So proteins, mostly I want you to think about making muscle and bone. But proteins make almost all of our body up. They make up our hair, they make up our skin, they make up our bones. So proteins are the most important part of our body. But there are also proteins that do other things, such as acting as enzymes. Enzymes are things in our body that speed up chemical reactions, like helping us to digest things more quickly. Some proteins are also antibodies, which help fight diseases in our bodies. Then there's even other proteins that serve as transport carriers in the blood. For example, hemoglobin is a protein that's found in our red blood cells, these cells right here, and they carry oxygen in our blood. Other proteins, such as these, that look like this weird shape, are allowing things to cross the cell membrane. They act as little channels. But mostly, proteins are the expressions of our genes. Our genes, our DNA, tells our body what proteins to make, tells our protein to make my blonde brown hair, to make my skin color this color, and to make more skin cells. So proteins are very, very important. Proteins are made up of the monomer amino acids. This is very, very important. They love to test you on this, that proteins are made up of amino acids. There are actually only 20 amino acids. Easy way to remember that amino acids make up proteins, think AAP, amazing, awesome proteins. Or sometimes I like to say, Ashley ate poop. Nucleic acids is the last one that we're going to be talking about. Nucleic acids is our DNA and RNA. These are the ones that are storing and transmitting genetic information. DNA is what we get from our mom and dad and determines what we look like. Think of N for nucleic acids, N for newspapers. Newspapers carry information, and so do nucleic acids. It's just a different type of information. Here we have DNA and the building block of DNA. Here are the building blocks, or monomers. They're called nucleotides. Nucleotides look like this, always. They're made up of a phosphate, a sugar, and a nitrogen-containing base. We're going to go into a lot more detail about this later on when we learn about DNA and RNA. But this is one building block, or one Lego. When we put all of those building blocks together, then we get a large molecule. We get a polynucleotide, many nucleotides linked together. So these are our DNA and RNA. Here you can see some of the key differences between DNA and RNA, and we'll look at these a little bit later as well. But DNA, you can see, is double-stranded, and RNA is single-stranded. So, to sum it all up, if something is organic, it doesn't mean it doesn't contain pesticides. It means it contains carbon. Carbon is the most important element out of all of them. There are 4 organic molecules, things that have carbon in them. They are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Last but not least, an alternate way to remember all 3 of these is this saying: Candy loves pooping newspapers. If you remember that, candy is sugar, so carbohydrates are sugars. Loves, candy loves, love handles. Love handles are fat. Pooping, funny, but poop, you can remember Ashley ate poop. Amino acids make up proteins. And finally, newspapers. Candy loves pooping newspapers. Newspapers carry news, carry information. So nucleic acids carry genetic information. And that's all.